What is magic mushroom therapy in regard to healing big past trauma? So, like I said a second ago, when maybe you've consumed some of my other content where you're talking about a little bit of a lighter, more manageable trip because you're doing it with a partner to become closer, or you're trying to gain more clarity entrepreneurially, or maybe you're just trying to deal with stress with microdosing. Um, Passing big trauma or healing big trauma with psychedelics is definitely something that you should take very seriously. You should either uh, know how to pick a facilitator that's really going to help you, that you feel comfortable with, that can help you along the journey. Because, as I like to say, the bigger the trauma, the bigger the prep work, in order for you to be prepared for what might come up. And and also be able to actually reap the benefits of the work after the fact. So if you had a profound experience and you're not having the support in order to integrate that after the fact, sometimes you can easily fall back into some of the issues that you were having before, or that trauma might kind of slip back into your system. So it's really important that you either have a lot of experience with psychedelics before trying to do it yourself, like I personally did, or you have a facilitator that's able to support you. Um, Maybe by now you already know who I am, but I'm just going to bring it up for those who are just watching this workshop. I became super passionate about utilizing sexuality and psychedelics in order to know yourself and to heal yourself. And so I use both healing modalities to be able to um, empower people in their businesses, or to find healing, or to connect with themselves and the universe in a deeper way than they ever have before, or to find depth in some of their relationships and or healing. So we'll go on to what is psychedelic psychotherapy. So if you are passing a huge trauma or dealing with a huge trauma, for instance, some people are doing end of life therapy with psychedelics. So they've gotten a terminal diagnosis, and it's very hard to live with knowing that you only have a certain amount of time left on the planet, which we all really only have so much time on the planet. But to really have a known fact that in just a few months you're not going to be able to be with your family and friends and continue on with life is very traumatic. And to be able to deal with that and have the best time while you're still around, that's why psychedelics are really helping some of those people, which I think is beautiful. There are two different types of psychedelic psychotherapy when you're talking about psychotherapy. That's talk, which is anywhere from 1 to 2.5 grams when with a more of a light mushroom, or mystical, which is 3 to 4 grams of a pretty strong mushroom. And that typically you're not talking during it. You're just in another universe, or in your own mind, or dealing with a lot of stuff on your own, but you might need a pat on the back or a rub on the back or something like that while you're dealing with passing huge amounts of trauma from the past. So those are the two that we're going to be talking about, at least on this call. When it comes to the benefits of psychedelic psychotherapy, these are the things that most people in trials are coming back with, explaining. And if you're interested in the psychedelics on the brain, I'm going to be doing another video on that, because I'm a huge brain nerd and I love understanding scientifically how it's turning off parts of your brain, or it might be connecting neural pathways. So I won't get into all of that on this one, but I'm going to talk about kind of the after effects or some of the things that people have felt during their trips. And what I have found on my trips have been these huge senses of unity and transcendence and this intuitive knowledge that I kind of after the fact felt like, oh, I always knew. I was connected to the infinite universe and infinite knowledge and infinite love, but you kind of forget it when you come down on earth for some reason. I also had this sense of sacredness that I didn't have before, which was my body was sacred, my mind was sacred, the world around me was sacred. A deeply felt positive mood. I think before I started on my psychedelic journey, it would take huge dopamine hits in ways that were very shallow for me to ever feel in a good mood. And those were so fleeting that it was very hard for me to just stay positive. I couldn't be a quote unquote positive person because I was so dependent on the outside world working in my favor that I felt very just uneasy all the time. Ego disillusion is a huge one as well. Just feeling deeply connected and kind of forgetting that you are an I and more of you are a part of the big picture is a great thing that happens with psychedelics. I'm going to talk for a second about my psychedelic journey, just because I think mine was a little bit unusual, or at least when talking to some shamans that I've been in connection with, or some of my mentors. I don't want to talk like my path is for everybody, just because from what I've heard, I had a little bit of a different experience. For some reason, I don't know if it was growing up in El Paso or growing up with the parents that I had, or the mixture of signs that I am, who knows what it was, but I just kept coming back for more, even though I was having extremely profound or extremely intense experiences. My first psychedelic experience was a pretty intense, huge acid trip. And coming from a person that was very closed off, very conservative, very religious, to finally finding so much fault in that and blockages in that, and finally letting someone convince me to do acid was huge for me, because I had never experienced anything like that before. And after the fact, I was afraid that I would have died one day never experiencing that. And I wanted to understand more about it. So then I really went down a million different rabbit holes and tried a ton of psychedelics like ayahuasca, MDMA, DMT, all kinds of things. And the things that really just jived with my system and really were the tools that I needed to heal and to help my confidence issues and to help my issues with feeling like a part of the whole was mushrooms. Mushrooms were just the thing that I kept wanting to come back to, kept wanting to know more about. So I definitely started with a couple of big trips that were wonderful, that were extremely healing. One of them was with my partner. And I've talked about that on the psychedelics for couples, but it was the first time that I really felt someone feeling me and feeling my pain and knowing me in an intimate way. Our energies definitely combined on a really big trip together. So that's to say, be careful about who you trip with. You want to make sure that it's definitely a facilitator that knows about holding their energetic boundaries and supporting you, or definitely doing it with a person that you want to bond with or become somewhat enmeshed with. But I'm going to get into my journey with psychedelics. Or with mushrooms. It was a few big trips, and then finally I read Food of the Gods, which is Terence McKenna. And I took his suggestions very literally, without really talking to very many people. I tend to do that. I tend to kind of go hard in the paint, as they say, typically by myself. And that could have been pretty traumatizing. I'm glad that I came out the other end okay, but I took his advice of 5 grams in the dark for health and spirituality pretty seriously, without taking into consideration that when he did say that, he hadn't experienced the strains of mushrooms that are available now. It's very similar to cannabis, where the stuff that they were smoking at Woodstock is definitely like uh, order of magnitudes lighter than it is now. And so some of the biggest mushrooms in the world and the strongest mushrooms in the world, Terence McKenna never really ingested. So I did want the strongest mushroom in the world times 5.5. And that is a lot for a huge grown man. And I'm not regretting that. I'm not regretting that I did that trip alone, because it was huge for me. It was definitely something that changed my life, and I am so glad that I did. But doing that alone without a facilitator and without um, really having support and integration after the fact could have been pretty hard for most people. I definitely devoted my life to the integration after the fact. So I would say that that's something that I will go back to. I typically like to do a big trip solo at least once a year to kind of cancel clear or wipe clean some of the built up traumas that happened at least throughout the year, or some of the ones that are really have like those strongholds in me that happened way back in the day, that in order to keep them at bay, I have to continue to keep doing trips to really confront them and understand them and accept them and know them and love them. So I will say that through my work with the Vita Institute, that was understanding what shadow work is, and understanding how to resource yourself and how to take care of yourself, whether or not you're in a psychedelic state, was something that I know that I was meant to experience, just because it meant that I was going to have a better life, but it also meant that I was going to be able to support other people to be able to experience that and know how to take care of themselves when life gets hard. So I'm going to talk about some of my favorite books that on my rabbit hole, going down this infinite rabbit hole of information and trips. It was kind of crazy because I asked the universe to give me the answers that I needed in a timely manner. And it was almost like clockwork that every time I would do a trip, it was either right before or right after I would come into possession of a book that was just exactly what I needed to work on and really set the tone for my either trip or for my integration after the fact. So I'm going to share these with you, and I'll definitely put the links to them in the notes. But if you have the ability to take the time to read these, I think even if you're not doing psychedelic journeys, they are really amazing books to have. So the first one is Essential Kink. And I know it sounds a little bit scary, but it's really just a method for shadow work. So what it says is unmask your shadow and embrace your power. And I think that was definitely something that I was struggling with before. I was just running from my shadow, and I could not feel powerful for that very reason, because without really accepting yourself and understanding yourself and really taming your dragons or your monsters, it's really hard for you to stand in a powerful place because you can't even deal with yourself. So this one was huge for me, and one of my favorite quotes comes out of it, which well, she quotes one of my favorite people, but it's Carl Jung, and he says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. So that was huge for me because our brains are really good at pushing everything away so we can get down the road. And I've said this before to people that I've talked to. So if you're listening to this and I've said this to you, sorry for having to hear it again, but in order for us to just live our lives and get down the road, we are not able to deal with or cope with some of our traumas. So we have to be very intentional about setting the place, setting the space to where our bodies will open up, and our inner children or whatever it is that is needing the healing feels like it's okay to come out. That means quiet, that means intention, that means nurturing your body, that means putting your nervous system into a very safe, comfortable space. So I think that being really intentional about finding your shadow, and then if you can't because you've been so good at hiding it and pushing it down, then I would say working with a facilitator or working with a coach to find out what those blocks are. And if you have anything buried deep down inside that you've forgotten because you don't want to deal with, is really great for you to kind of, even at a basic level, understand what those things are and work on integrating or prepping yourself for a trip that is kind of revolving around that. So this is definitely one of my favorite books. I absolutely love it. She's a great writer. Another thing that really empowered me on my journey was the more you find out about yourself, the more you find out about your past, the more your eyes open to the truth around you, which sometimes is very hard to deal with. It's very hard to understand that the safety that you've been perceiving is in all actuality not really that great for you. You'll start losing some friends, you'll start deviating in your work, you'll start deciding that cities aren't good for you, whatever it is, you will incrementally change over time. And that's very hard for your ego and for your safety to deal with. Also, kind of opening the wounds from the past can sometimes feel really debilitating, or it can make you feel overwhelmed. And so something that it was huge for me is Byron Katie's Loving What Is, which I don't know if y'all have read this book, but this is also amazing. It really is a nice guide to asking yourself 4 questions all the time about everything. And it was really hard for me at first to deal with those questions because I felt like they were very much gonna make me like closed off and make me not care about the world around me. But as I started giving her her suggestions a chance, it really just gave me so much peace that I was able to then show up for people in situations much better than coming at them in a very emotional from a very emotional place. So that one was huge. Another book that I really loved, which especially if you've dealt with like huge traumas in the past, it's really understanding how your body holds on to those traumas and how locking those up in your body is really bad for your health, and kind of teasing that out of your body is going to take work, and understanding how to do that is really important. So the next one I wanted to talk about was that the body keeps the score, and it's the brain, mind, and body in healing of trauma. This one is also one of the best that I've experienced. I don't know, I think maybe most of you have read this one, but this one was really great for me when I was understanding more about myself. So psychedelics really help you step back from yourself and see why you might be the way that you are. And sometimes the truth about how you are, especially in stressful situations, or how you are holding yourself back, is really hard to deal with. And that's another reason why you might want a facilitator or a coach to help you, because dealing with you by yourself while you're alone can be very hard. It's nice to step back with someone and talk about yourself in a really like loving and understanding way. So this book, Radical Self-Acceptance, was another one that I really, really, really loved. Lost Connections is the next one that I wanted to talk about. And I loved it because it really gave me an idea of why so many people around me were dealing with depression or dealing with stress and anxiety and coping with drugs or coping with shopping or coping with food. Like we all have our vices and we're all coping with the stresses of life in so many different ways. And the way that our society is set up is not really there to help us get away from that. It's really just like reinforcing those things. And so it can really be hard to change yourself and to change your life. But being able to see the truth about some of these things helps you to navigate that. When you see it again, you can kind of step back and understand what the problem might be. So Lost Connections was a great one that kind of gave me a lot of insight. This is the one that I was talking about earlier, Food of the Gods. Terrence McKenna just does such a beautiful job of explaining the importance of mushrooms and potentially why we are here because of mushrooms. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the stoned ape theory, but essentially what he talks about in a part of this book is how like Neolithic or cavemen or monkeys came down from the trees essentially and ate psychedelic mushrooms in the fields, and their brains just grew so fast and so big that it's essentially why we can have the brains that we do and talk the way that we do. It's very, very interesting. And it talks about mushrooms throughout history. It says a radical history of plants, drugs, and human evolution. I love this book. Another one that is really basic and easy to understand, and a lot of, it was like a good starter book for me to kind of understand the different ways that psychedelics could help me in a psychotherapeutic way. So this one is Psychotherapy, and it's user-friendly guide to psychedelic drugs and assisted psychotherapy. So this is what it looks like. It's very short, great user guide. This is another one, the psilocybin mushroom companion. I really like it. I think that some of the information in it is a little bit outdated, and she interviewed a few people that I currently don't really respect at this point, but there is some great information in it. Then the last one I'm going to talk about is Already Free. It's Buddhism meets psychotherapy, the path of liberation. This one was really, really great for me as well. I don't know if y'all have read this, but yeah, I'll continue on from the books to talk about a little bit more. But if you are going to try to navigate psychedelic psychotherapy yourself, or if you don't really have the means to be able to go down a big journey with a facilitator and go through talk therapy on top of your psychedelic therapy, then kind of like a do-it-yourself with smaller doses time and time again is definitely a path for you if you would like to take it. But it does take devotion, and it does take an attentiveness and you understanding how your brain works and what is going on with your past trauma and your psyche and how you're able to actually change those things. The resources that are available to us at this point are pretty amazing. So then that gets me to something that I've talked about before, but important considerations while you are considering healing a past trauma with a big psychedelic trip. I'm going to be including a bunch of practices that have really helped me in the past. So this was a great book. I include a lot of these in my favorite ones in my Afterglow course, but it's a behavioral therapy skills workbook. And so it's really important that it isn't just like a one and done situation where you kind of prepare yourself for a big trip, you have a profound experience, and maybe you just integrate for a couple of weeks after the fact. You're not going to see true lasting change. You will see true lasting change in maybe your mood and maybe your ability to resource yourself after the fact, but to make real lasting change and healing from a huge trauma, it does take little bits of changes in your life and you supporting yourself in those changes. So what I like to do and to help people do is to understand what their trauma potentially is or what their blocks are, or the smaller parts of a big trauma that they can heal little bits at a time. And then understanding what about their life is going to need to change. So, what I like to explain to people, for instance, is if they've had a big trauma, whether it be a big sexual trauma, or they've had abuse in the past, or they might have experienced a huge event. After a while, that known becomes something that your body knows. And sometimes it can be either addicted to that cortisol, or it can keep attracting that into its life because it just it knows it, and maybe it believes that about itself now. So especially with potentially people that have dealt with like sexual abuse in the past, what that does to inform your mind and body sometimes really embeds this horrible feeling of lack of self-esteem or lack of belief in being lovable. And all of those things are going to take a ton of little practices that are going to be able to help you change that about yourself. One huge trip is kind of going to break you open and give you the ability to change that about yourself, but it's going to take small little habits that are actually going to make a difference in your life, and you're going to have to give yourself time. So I will share some of my favorites, like I said, in the notes, so you can work on figuring out what they are, and then keeping those going. Now I can move on to the preparation. I always like to tell people that the T method is really important, just because it always goes into your system much faster. You don't have to worry about your stomach getting upset. It kind of breaks down the psilocin to where you don't have to have as much nausea. I will tell people that, especially on a big trip, or anywhere over 2 grams, you're definitely going to want to put a little bit of food in your system at least 2 to 3 hours before. I always joke about my favorite meal, just because I guess I'm a superstitious person, but one of my favorite trips, I try to replicate everything that I did before. But it makes sense because it is a very nourishing meal. It has foods that are alive, and so I like a salad or a fruit, and then a comfort food that has a little bit of like a carb to it. So I always like a little bit of mac and cheese, a little bit of a salad, a little bit of fruit, nothing that's very heavy. Sometimes people just like smoothies. You'll just want that to be able to help your stomach, but to not have anything super heavy in your stomach. Also, you might be like starving after the fact, but then not really want to eat. And that might make your body feel a little bit uneasy after the fact. So definitely have food. Whatever you're going to do a big trip, you have to be very, very, very intentional about your settings. So whenever I've done my big trips versus my smaller trips, I'll talk about my smaller trips. So my smaller trips, when I'm like maybe looking for clarity on something to do with my business or with my life, and I want to be able to be there and thinking through some things and understanding what's going on in my mind, I'll definitely put my starlight up on the ceiling. I'll put candles around me that are flameless because you don't want to have to worry about fire. All my animals will go away. I'll have blankets and socks available to me, and I typically won't have a face mask on. And maybe if I know how long the trip is going to be, I'll create a playlist that might help me. But on big trips, I'm very, very sensitive, and I do not have a playlist on because music really informs your mood and how you're feeling on a trip. And there have been times where I didn't have a long enough playlist, and a song came on that really triggered me, or it even was a song that I had never heard before. And something about it, it just had this like mood that was very ominous or scary or intense. And your body will react to the music. So it's really important that you're very, very careful about the music that you pick. Typically, you're just going to end up turning it off because it might be too much. But just be aware that the mood of the music will inform your mood and will inform your trip. Another one is eye masks. Sometimes that really helps people. When I did my hero dose, my epic dose, I had a face mask on at first, but I definitely ended up taking it off. But I wasn't actually able to see the world around me. I was in a different universe. But really just having all of those things accessible to you is really important. Prep work is also important because if it's a huge past trauma, there is a chance that you will be somewhat reliving that in order to heal it. And in which case you don't want to re-traumatize yourself. So that means that thinking about your past trauma beforehand, if that's a possibility, talking about it with someone, talking about it with your facilitator, writing about it, understanding what parts of it you actually want to heal is also really important. The things that I've noticed with working with people and myself is healing is possible because these are the things that kind of come out of psychedelics, and why I love psychedelics so much. There hasn't really been too many other modalities that I have done other than sex magic work or sexual healing work, which is these benefits, which is a change in self-concept, the enhanced self-worth, fresh awareness of inner resources, the sense of personal empowerment, and enhanced so yeah, that's the biggest things that I would say are, it kind of just reminds you who you are or who you're capable of being, and that is a very beautiful thing. You are not exactly what happened to you in the past. You can use those to understand how to move forward. I believe that the universe at times gives us past experiences so we can help other people deal with them. And it also really helps us become passionate about some things. I definitely wouldn't have gotten into the work that I'm in without some of the experiences that I've had in the past. And some of the most intimate, wonderful, happy experiences that I've had are helping other people. And I don't think I would have ever considered myself a facilitator or a healer or any type of a guide if I hadn't first walked through the fire before those people. I wouldn't have felt worthy of helping people if I hadn't experienced some of the trauma that they had experienced. I don't know if I would have been fit enough to feel like I could help some of the people with some of the things that I've helped them with. So those are definitely some of the things that you can expect. Typically, when you work with a facilitator, you'll want to ask things like how many times they've trip sat, what their trip looks like, I personally either like to go and get a Airbnb where we're out in the middle of nature. There's nothing around them that is going to be triggering at all. They're not going to be in their own home. They're not going to be bothered by anyone. Phones go away. We work for almost a couple of hours beforehand prepping for the trip. We make sure everything in the room is perfect. I support them during their drinking and going in, and then I'm there whether they need me to just be a DJ or just rub their back or let them be alone and just come in when they really need someone to know that they're not alone. You'll want to understand what your facilitator's experience is and what their methodologies are to make sure that they're right for you. And you'll also want to understand how they're going to support you after the fact, because integration, especially with a big trauma passing, is very, very important. I would say that with the legalization of psychedelics and more institutes that are opening, that are going to be very tightly controlled by legalities and insurances and all of these things. I don't know what that's going to look like. If you feel safer to do something like that, by all means, that's something that you understand for yourself. But I'm always going to believe that not a synthesized mushroom, but a real mushroom is the way to go. And in nature with an actual healer is definitely the way to go, rather than in a clinic or in with a doctor that maybe has never really even experienced the medicine themselves in a profound way. So that is my own personal belief, and you have to find the right experience for yourself. My point is to say that please be careful about who you pick, and if you decide to do it alone, make sure that you have some type of support. I definitely have helped people that were pretty hell bent on doing it themselves. Just the fact that I was available to them over the phone if they needed me, even though I don't suggest people use their phones at all while they're tripping, was beneficial to them. But yeah, it's having someone that's been through that and able to talk to you about it after the fact, which is really going to help. That gets me to the last little bit before I open up questions, which is doses. So I've talked about this before, but I definitely believe that a nice journey for people would be, I'm going to start with microdosing, or I'm going to start with a nice light trip with a partner, or I'm going to do a cancel clear trip by myself, which is typically 1 to 2 grams. And that's a really nice meet and greet. That's like understanding the mushroom, that's saying hello to them. It's understanding what that even looks like. So you're not just like blown away by a huge trip for your first time. So any combination of a microdose regimen and a really nice meet and greet trip is definitely something that I suggest for someone who's never tried psychedelics before, or maybe it's been a while and the last time you tried psychedelics was in college and it was very traumatizing because you took way too much in a very crowded place, potentially while drinking alcohol or other drugs. So definitely give mushrooms another chance with a really healing framework in mind, and understand that you don't want to just jump right into a 3 to 4 gram experience, because that might be a bit much for most people to be able to handle. You don't want to traumatize yourself to the point where you're afraid of mushrooms or you're afraid of mushroom trips, because it's important that you keep coming back to them time and time again to keep on your journey. So then that's the next one that I'll talk about is talk. And that is 3 to 4 grams, depending on the mushroom. That's 3 to 4 grams of like a true albino teacher or a golden teacher, where you're still able to talk and understand what's going on and potentially be able to work through some things and get some support from a facilitator. A deep dive is definitely not for novices. That it's for people who really understand psychedelics and have experienced a lot before. One of my mentors has a great analogy where he likens psychedelics to high diving. And if you have experience in high diving, you're going to land beautifully without a splash from a very, very high jumping off point. But if you don't have experience, you have the potential of belly flopping and it being extremely painful and traumatizing. So that's a great analogy in my opinion, just because you are essentially jumping off into the void, and you can either get stuck on the edge because you're very scared because you've never experienced anything like this before, and being stuck on the edge while in a psychedelic experience is kind of one of the worst feelings, or just screaming your head off on the way down, which is not really helping you heal. So you'll want to be kind of dipping your toe in, and then maybe like walking into the pool and then swimming around. And then if you want to do a deep dive later, that's definitely something that you have the ability to do. So that leaves 10 minutes left for any type of questions. But before I go to that, I just want to make sure that I talked about everything that I wanted to talk about. Which is, yeah, just making sure that you're understanding what is possible. If you want to prep your mind and body and soul a little bit more before you start on your psychedelic journey, some of those books that I mentioned are going to be amazing for you. Talking to a facilitator to understand a little bit more, definitely having someone decide your dose for you if you're not used to dosing yourself, understanding what the mushroom strain is, how old it is, and making sure that it's right for what you're trying to do, because all the strains have different personalities and are definitely great for some trips and not for others. And then being very intentional about prepping yourself the day before, setting up your surroundings and setting up your mind, body, and soul the day of, and then after the fact, the whole next day, being very ginger with yourself, being very sweet with yourself, not planning a bunch of outings, not running around and doing a bunch of stuff, not jumping right back into work, but really understanding the benefits of it. So my favorite way to go about it is a Friday night prep session with a facilitator. Then next day on Saturday, doing something outside in nature, moving your body, doing something that really makes you feel grounded, and setting up the container to where you feel safe and ready to open. And then starting about anywhere from 3 to 4 p.m. So if you're taking the tea method and you're doing 3 to 4 grams, or even 1 to 2, depending on your body, it could take anywhere from 4 to 6 hours for your trip to happen. Sometimes people that have different metabolisms, it might take anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes. It's very rare to take more than that if you're doing the tea method, but I have seen it happen. And then really just like letting yourself have that space to see what happens and what unfolds. And then that typically leads you to about 7 or 8 whenever you're potentially done, which allows you to talk a little bit, maybe get a little bit of nourishing food in your stomach, and then being able to shower and getting your nervous system and body back to a regulated state, and then potentially being able to sleep. I typically like doing something like a CBD oil or sleepy time tea, all the things that'll kind of bring you back to earth and get you ready for bed. And then the next day, understanding what is needing to be integrated, what is needing to be talked about. Another quick thing that I'm going to mention before I open up for questions is ghost pipe, which I've talked about it on my Instagram before. And it amazingly, it grows, as it's a plethora of it out here. It is a very protected plant. and it is a very interesting plant, but for some reason it has the ability to kind of knock down psychedelic episodes. So typically when I help people with their psychedelic journeys, I create my own ghost pipe tincture for people that might be freaking out and wanting to knock it down a few notches. It only takes a dropper full of it to really kind of help regulate the system. It doesn't work for everybody, but I have seen it work for quite a few people, or heard of it working for quite a few people. I've only tried it a couple of times myself. I will go more into that on another talk, but it is something that can help you if you feel like you're freaking out during psychedelic journey. So that is the end of this. I hope this was helpful. I know I went through a lot, but do you have any questions, or do you feel like that was basically good?
Hi, Bijou.
Hi.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. As always, it was very educational.
Good.
I do have one question. So, with the different mushrooms, if you go up a dose, is that for the intensity or for the duration? Is duration due solely on your own body metabolism, or would a larger dose take longer? I mean, is that how it works, or is it more the intensity on a larger dose?
That's a great question. So the very strong mushrooms, especially with the tea method, the stronger that you do, the faster your body typically metabolizes it. You're not really having a peak experience for more than 2 to 3 hours, sometimes 4. The longest I've ever had was a 6-hour, very intense trip. And that was more than I think most people should do. But that's a good question. So if you were to do 3 to 4 of, say, like a golden teacher or a true albino teacher, and then you were to do 5 or 6 of that, that would be like considered a hero dose, a very big deep dive, in which case your body typically tries to get it out of its system. Just because if you think about it, like if you had eaten something that was poisonous and it didn't want you to be eating it, your body would try to get it out of its system pretty fast. But it really depends on people's metabolism and their environment and how they prepped their body. So yeah, I would say that for a big dose, you can typically expect anywhere from a 3 to 5 hour trip, but a 3 to 4 dose of a light mushroom, it could be anywhere from a 6 to 7 hour trip, but it won't be as intense the whole time.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then I did just have one more question on that same. I think you touched on it a little bit, but do different strains give you a different feeling? So like some might be a body experience, some might be more hallucinatory experience, or
Oh yeah,
is it,
absolutely.
again, dependent on the person? Yeah, okay.
It's definitely dependent on the strain. So there's a whole book, and I'll start sharing some of these on my social media, but the mushrooms are known for their characteristics in how they make you feel, and then the way that they work in your body. So the stronger mushrooms typically have a huge amount of visuals, or you'll see a lot of other interesting things on them. You'll have very like artistic different visions, whereas some of them are very like body high euphoria. You're still grounded and you're still able to understand the world around you. You don't really like go away. So for instance, a golden teacher, or maybe even a true albino teacher or a chitwan, you are here. Even some of the indigenous people would take them before they would go hunting, because it kind of helps your eyes, and it helps prepare your brain to be sensitive to the world around you, and you have this great feeling of euphoria and a body high. But say ape, like a albino penis envy, that is a knock you on your ass. You're going to be in a different realm, seeing crazy things for hours type mushroom. So you'll definitely have a very different experience on them. And that's why it's good to either talk to a grower or a facilitator to give you an idea of what you're going to experience, because not prepping yourself for the experience that you're about to have is a good way to kind of weigh yourself out during a trip.